They told me I didn't understand money anymore, as if I'd somehow forgotten what numbers meant, as if the woman who built a home, raised a family, and kept the lights on for decades had suddenly become incompetent. All while they were quietly swiping my cards for vacations I never even heard about. That was the moment I knew I had to take back control. My name is Julia. Where are you watching from right now? I always love to know the places these stories reach. Living rooms, kitchens, maybe even a late-night walk. Somehow it makes me feel less alone in telling this, so let me take you back. I didn't lose track of money. I lost track of trust, and trust is a far more dangerous currency to misplace. It started in whispers, the kind of everyday moments you don't think twice about at first, a missing receipt here, a balance that seemed lower than I remembered there. I'd ask about it, and the answer was always the same. Oh, don't worry about it. You wouldn't understand the finances anymore. That line stung, not because I didn't understand, but because of the way they said it, as if age had dulled my mind, as if my questions were just annoyances. And at first, I believed them. I wanted to. I thought maybe I had miscalculated. Maybe I really didn't keep up like I used to. But then came the first slip. One afternoon, my friend Rose stopped me in the grocery store. "How was the trip?" she asked. I blinked at her. "What trip?" She laughed, confused. "The beach. They posted pictures. Looked beautiful. Didn't you go?" No, I hadn't gone. I hadn't even been invited. Yet the charges on the credit card told a different story. Plane tickets, hotel rooms, dinners, all under my name, my account. I remember standing in my kitchen holding the statement in my hand, staring at the ink like it might rearrange itself into something that made sense. My chest felt hollow. There's betrayal in cheating. There's betrayal in lies. But financial betrayal, that cuts differently. It isn't just about money. It's about power, about trust, about the ground you thought you were standing on suddenly giving way. When I confronted them, they smiled. Smiled. "Relax. You don't understand these things anymore. It's complicated." Complicated. That word spun in my head like a taunt. What was complicated about charging a luxury resort to my card? What was complicated about being excluded from my own money? I went to bed that night with the sound of the fridge humming and my own heart pounding in my ears. I kept repeating their words. "You don't understand." Maybe they were right. Maybe I really didn't understand, but not for the reasons they thought. I didn't understand how someone who promised to walk beside me could so easily walk over me. I didn't understand how vacations could be sweeter, knowing they were paid for with stolen trust. I didn't understand how my silence had become their opportunity. That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't beg for explanations they'd never give honestly. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time came, I would act. The strange thing about betrayal is that once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. You begin to notice every crack, every inconsistency, their tone when they brushed off questions, the way they shuffled papers quickly out of sight, the fact that they suddenly took longer errands without explanation. And me? I played my part. I acted like the woman who didn't understand anymore. The woman too old, too confused, too trusting to know what was happening. But inside, I was taking notes. I was memorizing every date, every dollar, every dismissive word. Because deep down, I already knew something they didn't. They thought they were taking my money, but what they were really doing was giving me strength. And strength, once awakened, is a far more dangerous thing than a stolen credit card. I used to think betrayal was a single moment, a knife in the back, a flash of pain, an instant when everything changes. But it's not. It's slow. It's a drip, drip, drip of small things you brush aside until suddenly you're drowning. At first, I tried to dismiss the credit card charges. I told myself maybe there was a mix-up. Maybe some of the costs weren't what they seemed. People make mistakes, after all. But then more slips came, and each one dug a little deeper. There was the grocery bill that came back suspiciously high, though the fridge looked just as empty. There was the weekend they claimed to be visiting family, but the receipts showed fine dining at a steakhouse 2 towns over, and always the same line when I asked, "Don't worry, you wouldn't understand." It became a script. They had their role, and I was supposed to play mine. The naive woman, too, out of touch to know better. And for a while, I did. Because part of me wanted to believe them. Part of me clung to the idea that it was all a misunderstanding, that the person I trusted most couldn't possibly treat me like an open wallet. But cracks have a way of widening. One evening, we were sitting at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd planned birthdays and holidays for years. I slid the bank statement across the wood and asked, softly, "Can you explain this?" It was a charge for a resort spa package, nearly $1,000. They barely glanced at it before waving a hand. Oh, that was just a booking error, already taken care of. But the following week, I heard from another friend. "I hope you had fun on your trip. The photos looked amazing." My stomach nodded. Trip? Photos? This wasn't the first time someone else knew more about my finances than I did. I started digging, quietly, patiently. I sat at the desk late at night, spreading statements across the wood like puzzle pieces. One by one, the picture became clear. Hotel stays, airline tickets, upscale restaurants, designer stores, and not just on one card. Every joint account we shared was touched, some drained nearly dry. I remember pressing my palms to my face, trying to steady my breath. It wasn't just a matter of dollars. It was my dignity, my independence, my sense of safety being siphoned away with every swipe. The worst part? They didn't even try to hide it well. No clever cover stories, no effort to disguise the spending. It was arrogance, plain and simple. The arrogance of someone who believed they had convinced me I was powerless. And in a way, that was the sharpest cut of all. Not the money leaving my account, but the belief that I wouldn't notice. Or worse, that I would notice and still do nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the hum of the furnace, and a thought crept in. An ugly, honest thought. What if they've always been this way? The vacations were new, but what about the years before? The times I was told, "Don't worry about it, I'll handle the bills." The times I didn't check because I trusted. Was this betrayal new or just newly visible? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I couldn't unsee it anymore. The next morning, over coffee, I asked a simple question. "Do you ever worry we're overspending?" They laughed. "Overspending? Please, you wouldn't understand." That phrase again, like a slap across the face, and something inside me shifted. I stopped hearing it as dismissal. I started hearing it as a confession. You wouldn't understand. Translation, don't look too close. You wouldn't understand. Translation, I don't want to explain. You wouldn't understand. Translation, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I don't care if you find out. It was no longer denial, it was deliberate. And that was the first real twist of the knife. Not just one card, not just one trip. Every joint account, every piece of financial ground I thought was shared, was being mined for their indulgences. I closed the laptop and stared at the blank wall for a long time. It felt like the house wasn't mine anymore. Like every object in it was bought with a lie. But beneath the grief, beneath the anger, something else stirred. Not quite resolve, not yet. More like curiosity. How far would they go if I let them believe I was blind? There's a peculiar kind of power in being underestimated. They thought I was too old, too scattered, too simple to notice what was happening. And instead of correcting them, I leaned into it. I started to play dumb. At first, it felt unnatural. Every fiber of me wanted to scream, "I see you. I know exactly what you're doing." But instead, I tilted my head and nodded when they explained the finances, like I was a schoolchild. I let my eyes go soft, my tone gentle. "Oh, okay, if you say so." And the strangest thing happened. The more oblivious I pretended to be, the bolder they became. They'd leave statements out on the counter, not even bothering to tuck them away. Glossy brochures from travel agencies appeared in the mail. Packages arrived, shoes, handbags, gadgets, things I hadn't ordered, yet somehow all addressed to our home. I would pick them up and ask with a little smile, "Did we order something new?" They'd smirk. "Don't worry about it, it's covered." Covered. By me. One evening, I sat across from them at dinner, listening as they bragged about the great deal they got on flights. My fork hovered in midair while I kept my face serene, nodding as if they were sharing the weather report. Inside, my stomach churned. But I didn't argue. I didn't let the rage spill over. Instead, I asked questions. Small, innocent questions, like a child tugging at a thread. "So how does that work? You just book it online?" Or, "Oh, I don't know how all that banking stuff works anymore. Can you show me?" They never did show me, but they relaxed. They grew comfortable. They believed the story they had built. Julia doesn't understand money anymore. Julia won't fight back, and I made sure they believed it. Meanwhile, in the quiet hours, I became my own detective. I kept a small notebook hidden in my dresser drawer, tucked between old scarves no one touched. Every purchase, every withdrawal, every date went in there. I cross-checked bank statements, credit card bills, even receipts I fished out of the trash. It felt like building a case, brick by brick. Except instead of presenting it to a judge, I was presenting it to myself. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I wasn't losing my grip. The more I documented, the clearer it became. This wasn't carelessness. It wasn't a one-time slip. It was a pattern. A deliberate siphoning of trust and money, disguised as too complicated for me to understand. And still, I kept up the act. At family gatherings, when someone mentioned a new vacation, I'd smile politely. "Oh, I must be behind on the details." When friends asked if I'd seen the new purchases, I'd laugh lightly. I can't keep up these days. It was like donning a mask. On the outside, I was the woman they believed I was. Harmless, oblivious. Inside, I was sharpening. The thing about playing dumb is that it buys you time, and with time, you can build strength. I began moving in small, quiet ways, calling the bank but never from the house phone, gathering brochures about financial planning under the guise of curiosity, asking old friends for their stories about splitting accounts. Every piece of information was a weapon tucked away for later. And yet, even as I built my quiet arsenal, there were nights when the mask slipped in private. I'd sit in the dark with tears stinging my eyes, asking myself how it had come to this, how the person who once kissed my forehead now used me as a piggy bank. The silence of the house would press in, heavy and unforgiving. And then I'd hear their voice echo in my mind, "You wouldn't understand." Those words no longer hurt the way they had before. They fueled me. Every time I remembered them, it reminded me why I was pretending, why I was gathering, why I was waiting. I wasn't playing dumb because I was powerless. I was playing dumb because I was patient. And patience, I was learning, could be a weapon too. Because sooner or later, the person who thinks you're blind will leave themselves exposed. And when they did, I would be ready. The thing about liars is that they rarely stop at one lie. Once they believe they're untouchable, the lies multiply, and so did the spending. What started as a few suspicious dinners and a vacation ballooned into something shameless. Designer shopping bags stacked in the closet, jewelry boxes shoved into drawers, weekend errands that somehow required an overnight stay in a hotel. Each new indulgence was carved out of my accounts, my history of hard work, my safety net, and every time I noticed, I kept up the act, smiling faintly, feigning confusion, nodding at their excuses. But inside, the mask was starting to crack. One Saturday morning, I sat at the dining table with a pile of envelopes, flipping through statements while they were out. The numbers no longer shocked me. They exhausted me. 1,000 here, 2,000 there. withdrawals with no explanation, purchases with no receipts. But then I saw it. A line item that didn't match the usual pattern. It wasn't the credit card this time. It was my savings account. My chest tightened as I traced the transaction with my fingertip, as if the ink might burn me. It wasn't just a withdrawal, it was a siphoning. Thousands gone, moved without my knowledge, not from the everyday pool of shared expenses, but from the account I had built over decades. My cushion, my retirement, my safety net. That was sacred ground, and they had raided it. I sat back in my chair, the room spinning. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall grew louder, mocking me. I pressed both hands to my face and whispered, "No, not like this." In that moment, grief and rage mingled until I couldn't tell them apart. I had suspected they were greedy. I hadn't realized they were willing to strip me bare. When they came home that evening, swinging shopping bags from one arm, I forced myself to stay calm. "Good day?" I asked lightly. They grinned, kissed the air near my cheek, and said, "Great deal at the mall." I smiled back, but inside, something snapped. Later that night, I crept into the spare room, shut the door, and pulled out my notebook. I turned to a fresh page and wrote in sharp, dark strokes, "They touched the savings." That was the line I didn't know I'd been waiting for. The line between tolerating and refusing, between playing dumb and fighting back. For days afterward, I moved in a haze, still smiling, still nodding, still playing the role they believed. But beneath the surface, I was steel. At the bank, I sat with a quiet, kind-faced manager who listened as I explained. My voice shook, but my words were steady. "I need to know how to protect myself," I said. She didn't flinch. She didn't dismiss me. She explained my options in detail, her voice firm and respectful. For the first time in months, I felt like someone believed me. I walked out of that building with a plan, a secret plan. Every day after, I carried on the charade at home. They laughed louder, bragged more, spent more. I let them. I needed them to think nothing had changed. But something had changed. Me. Because once you see your future drained in black and white numbers, once you realize someone you trusted is willing to gamble with your survival, you stop asking why. You start asking when. When will I act? When will I cut the cord? When will I reclaim what's mine? And though I didn't know it then, the answer was coming soon. The day I discovered the savings account had been touched was the day I stopped asking why. I no longer needed their explanations, their excuses, their polished lies. What I needed was a way out. Taking back control wasn't dramatic, not at first. It was small, almost invisible. That's the thing about real change. It begins like a whisper, not a roar. I started with a visit to the bank, a different branch than our usual one. I sat across from a young woman named Carla who listened carefully as I explained what I needed. Her eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "We can open an account in your name only. Separate from everything else." The pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed the papers. For years, every financial decision had been ours. But in that moment, it was mine. The sound of the pen scratching across the form was quiet, but to me it roared like thunder. When I left, I didn't tell a soul, not even Rose, my closest friend. The secrecy wasn't about shame anymore, it was about strategy. The more they thought I was blind, the easier it would be to walk away clean. From then on, every time I deposited money, I split it. A portion into the joint accounts, just enough to keep appearances. The rest into my new account, a private reservoir of strength. At home, the game continued. They'd wave receipts in my face, boasting about great deals on weekend getaways. I'd smile and nod, as if impressed. Meanwhile, late at night, I was transferring bills into my name alone. Utilities, insurance, the car. Each one a string cut from the web that tied me down. There was a strange satisfaction in it, like undoing a knot that had choked me for too long. Every letter I sent, every phone call I made, every account I switched into my own name, it all chipped away at their control. Of course, There were moments when fear nearly broke through. What if they found out? What if they confronted me before I was ready? But then I'd hear their voice echo in my mind, "You don't understand money anymore." And I'd remind myself, maybe I let them believe that, but I understand enough to save myself. One evening, we sat together in the living room. They were scrolling through vacation packages on the laptop, muttering about all-inclusive resorts. I leaned over and asked sweetly, "Will that fit into the budget?" They smirked, patting my hand. "Leave it to me. You wouldn't get it." I smiled. Oh, but I did. I understood more than they realized. With each passing week, I felt myself growing lighter, not because the betrayal hurt less, but because the weight of helplessness was slipping off my shoulders. I wasn't powerless. I was preparing. And there was something oddly empowering about keeping my plan to myself. For once, the secrets in the house weren't only theirs. The breaking point came one afternoon at the mailbox. A new credit card statement arrived, thicker than usual. I flipped through it quickly before they could snatch it away. Charges for flights, hotel rooms, meals, this time in another country. I hadn't even known they'd gone that far. But instead of crying, instead of feeling that familiar pit in my stomach, I smiled. Because this time, I was ready. By then, I had nearly every important account in my own name. My savings were shielded. My income had a safe home. The only thing left was the joint checking, the last thread tying me to them. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to their even breathing beside me. And I realized I didn't just want to survive this, I wanted to end it on my terms. So I decided. Tomorrow, I'd close the last joint account. Tomorrow, the game would end, and when it did, the mask would come off. The morning I walked into the bank to close the last joint account, the world felt sharper. The air had a bite to it, the glass doors gleamed, even the sound of my heels against the tile seemed louder. It was the sound of finality. I signed the paperwork with steady hands. "This will remove them from access completely," the teller explained. I nodded. That's exactly what I want. When I walked out, my heart was hammering, but not from fear, from freedom. For the first time in years, every dollar tied to my name was mine again. I didn't have to wait long for the storm. That evening, they came through the door, face tight, voice already raised. "What the hell happened to the account? My card was declined today." I looked up from the kitchen table, where I was calmly folding laundry. My hands kept moving. Methodical, deliberate. I closed it. They froze, blinking as if the words didn't compute. What? You can't just... "I can," I said evenly, still folding. And I did. Their face darkened. "You don't understand how finances work. You've ruined everything." There it was again. That line. The one they thought would keep me small. I set the folded shirt down, lifted my gaze, and met their eyes. My voice was steady, but it cut sharper than any shout. "I may not understand money the way you do, but I understand theft." Silence. For the first time, they didn't have a script. They sputtered, scrambling for excuses. It was for us, for our life together. "You've always been too sensitive about these things." I shook my head. Vacations I wasn't invited on? Designer clothes I never wore? Meals in places I never saw? That wasn't for us. That was for you. Their voice rose, desperate now. "You're overreacting. You're confused." I leaned forward, my tone low and firm. "No, I was confused before. Now I'm clear. Every trip, every purchase, every dollar you drained from me, I saw it. I wrote it down. I know exactly what you've done." They laughed bitterly, a sound like breaking glass. "So what? You think you can just cut me off?" "I already have." The room seemed to contract around us, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, the space between each breath. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking. They raged, pacing the kitchen, tossing out excuses, insults, half-baked apologies. But none of it touched me anymore. The words that once hooked into my chest now slid off like rain against glass. Finally, they stopped, leaning on the counter, eyes wild. "You'll regret this," they spat. I stood, pushing the laundry basket aside. My voice was calm, almost soft. "No, the only thing I regret is letting it go on this long." For the first time, I watched fear flicker across their face. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing access. Fear of losing the money. Fear of losing control. And in that flicker, I saw the truth I'd tried to ignore. It was never about me. Not really. It was about what I provided, what they could take, what they could drain. The confrontation didn't end with a dramatic slam of the door or a tearful collapse. It ended with stillness. Me standing firm. Them stripped of excuses. The balance of power shifted in silence. When I went to bed that night, I didn't cry. I didn't replay their words or doubt my actions. I slept deeply, peacefully, because I knew the accounts were closed, the mask was gone, and I had taken back what was mine. The house feels quieter now, not the silence of tension, but the kind of quiet that lets you breathe. I sit at the same kitchen table where so many lies were told, but this time, the space feels mine again. A cup of tea in front of me, the afternoon light spilling across the wood, the bank statements neatly stacked, under my name only. It's strange how ordinary freedom looks. There were no trumpets when I closed those accounts, no fireworks when I drew my line, just paperwork, signatures, and choices made in steady ink. And yet, those small acts reshaped everything. People think betrayal ends with anger, but it doesn't. Not really. After the fury cools, you're left with questions. Why did I ignore the signs? Why did I let their words weigh more than my instincts? Why did I let myself shrink for so long? I've stopped searching for answers that won't come. Some people betray because they can, because it's easier than being honest, because they see kindness as weakness and trust as opportunity. It doesn't make sense if you live by different values, and I do. What I understand now is this. Betrayal says more about the betrayer than it ever says about the betrayed. There are scars, yes. Financially, I'll be rebuilding for a while. Emotionally, I'll be carrying the memory of those dismissive words, "You don't understand," long after the numbers balance out again. But scars don't just mark wounds. They mark survival. I've learned that control doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like pretending to play the fool until the moment is right. And sometimes it looks like walking into a bank, signing your name, and walking out with your future in your hands again. The truth is, I didn't just reclaim my money, I reclaimed myself. I find myself smiling more often now, not because everything is perfect, it isn't, but because the weight of helplessness is gone. I cook meals for myself without the sour taste of resentment. I call my friends without dreading the questions about trips I never took. I look at my accounts and see clarity instead of confusion, and in quiet moments, I reflect on the fire that betrayal lit in me. I never thought I'd have to fight like this. I never wanted to. But maybe strength shows up when we least expect it, in the very moments we feel most robbed. If you're listening to this, if you've ever been dismissed, gaslit, or told you wouldn't understand, hear me. You are not powerless. You are not invisible. Sometimes the sharpest moves are made in silence. Sometimes the bravest act is deciding in your own time that enough is enough. I can't say I'll never be hurt again. None of us can. But I know now that I will never again let someone convince me I don't understand my own worth. The accounts are closed. The lies are exposed. The chapter is over. And as I sit here sipping my tea, I realize something simple, something I wish I had known from the start. I was never confused about money. I was confused about love disguised as entitlement, and I will never mistake one for the other again.